Gary Leon Ridgway, born on February 18, 1949, is infamously recognized as the Green River Killer, one of America's most notorious serial murderers. Initially convicted for 48 separate killings that took place from the early 1980s to the late 1990s, Ridgway later faced an additional charge, bringing his total to 49 confirmed murders. This grim tally places him among the deadliest serial killers in U.S. history by number of proven victims. Ridgway's targets were predominantly women in vulnerable situations, often sex workers and underage runaways. Before authorities could identify him, the media dubbed him the Green River Killer after his first 5 victims were discovered near Washington's Green River. His method of killing was chilling. He would strangle his victims, typically with his hands, though sometimes with ligatures. After killing them, Ridgway would discard their bodies in secluded, wooded areas across King County. Disturbingly, he often revisited the bodies to commit necrophilic acts. Although Ridgway had been on investigators' radar since 1982, they couldn't definitively connect him to the murders at the time. It wasn't until DNA profiling technology advanced that authorities could tie him to the killings, leading to his arrest on November 30, 2001, as he left his job at the Kenworth Truck Factory in Renton, Washington. In exchange for sparing him the death penalty, Ridgway agreed to cooperate with authorities by revealing the locations of additional victims. He ultimately received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, as the second son of Mary and Thomas Ridgway. His childhood was troubled, with relatives describing his mother as domineering and arguments between his parents. Ridgway's father was a bus driver who often complained about the presence of sex workers. Ridgway had a bedwetting problem until he was 13, and his mother would forcefully wash his genitals after every episode. He later confessed to defense psychologists that he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction toward his mother, and fantasized about killing her. Ridgway is dyslexic and was held back a year in high school. At the age of 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy who survived the attack. Ridgway led the boy into the woods and stabbed him through the ribs into his liver. In 1969, Gary Leon Ridgway graduated from Tye High School and soon married his 19-year-old high school girlfriend, Claudia Craig. Shortly after, he enlisted in the United States Navy and was deployed to Vietnam, where he served aboard a supply ship and saw combat. During his military service, Ridgway regularly engaged with sex workers and contracted gonorrhea. Though frustrated by this, he continued these encounters without using protection. His marriage to Claudia ended in divorce within a year. After his arrest, friends and family described Ridgway as a friendly yet odd individual. Both of his first 2 marriages ended in divorce, with infidelity being a contributing factor on both sides. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, revealed that Ridgway once put her in a chokehold. During this second marriage, Ridgway experienced a religious awakening, becoming deeply involved in his faith. He would preach door to door, read the Bible aloud at work and at home, and demanded that his wife adhere to their pastor's strict teachings. At times, Ridgway would break down in tears after sermons or Bible readings. Despite his newfound religiosity, he continued to visit sex workers and even pressured his wife into engaging in public sex, sometimes near areas where his victims' bodies were later found. Those close to Ridgway described him as having an insatiable sexual appetite. His 3 ex-wives and multiple former girlfriends recounted that he demanded sex several times a day, often preferring to do so in public places or in the woods. Ridgway himself admitted to a deep-seated obsession with sex workers, a group with whom he had a conflicted relationship. Though he frequently complained about their presence in his neighborhood, he also regularly sought their services. In a statement made at his plea hearing, Ridgway expressed his hatred for prostitutes, explaining that he resented paying them for sex. Some believe Ridgway struggled internally, caught between his strong sexual desires and his devout religious beliefs. Ridgway had 1 son with his second wife, Marcia. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Gary Ridgway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women in the Seattle and Tacoma areas of Washington. In later court testimonies, Ridgway admitted that he had killed so many victims that he eventually lost count. Most of the killings occurred between 1982 and 1984, targeting sex workers and runaways he picked up along Pacific Highway South. To gain their trust, Ridgway would sometimes show the women a picture of his son. Once he had lured them, they engaged in sexual acts, typically with Ridgway behind them. He would then wrap one arm tightly around their necks, while using the other to pull back as hard as he could, strangling them. Ridgway carried out most of his murders either in his home, his truck, or secluded locations. Many of the victims' bodies were discarded in wooded areas near the Green River, around Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and other remote dump sites in South King County. In addition to the Washington murders, 2 confirmed and 2 suspected victims were found in the Portland, Oregon area. Ridgway often left the bodies in clusters, sometimes posed and usually nude. He also revisited several of the bodies to commit acts of necrophilia. Ridgway later explained that he didn't find necrophilia more sexually gratifying, but it reduced his urge to find new victims, lowering his risk of being caught. To confuse law enforcement, Ridgway occasionally contaminated the crime scenes with items like gum, cigarette butts, and personal belongings of other people. He even transported the remains of some victims across state lines into Oregon, further complicating the investigation. Around 1985, Gary Ridgway began a relationship with Judith Mawson, whom he married in 1988, making her his 3rd wife. In a 2010 television interview, Mawson shared that when she first moved into Ridgway's house during their dating period, there was no carpet. Detectives later informed her that he had likely wrapped one of his victims in that missing carpet. She also recalled how Ridgway would sometimes leave early for work, allegedly for overtime shifts. Mawson speculated that he may have committed some of the murders during these early morning hours. Before police contacted her in 1987, Mawson claimed she had no suspicion of his involvement in any crimes, and she wasn't aware of the Green River Killer as she didn't follow the news. Ridgway himself stated that his murder rate decreased while he was in a relationship with Mawson and that he genuinely loved her. Of his 49 known victims, only 3 were killed after their marriage. Mawson later told a local news outlet, "I feel I have saved lives by being his wife and making him happy." In April 1987, police collected hair and saliva samples from Ridgway. These samples were crucial for later DNA profiling, which eventually led to his arrest. On November 30, 2001, while Ridgway was working as a spray painter at the Kenworth truck factory, police apprehended him. He was arrested on suspicion of murdering 4 women nearly 2 decades earlier after DNA evidence matched semen found on the victims to the saliva samples previously collected. The initial victims in the indictment were Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. Soon after, 3 more victims, Wendy Caulfield, Deborah Bonner, and Deborah Estes, were added to the indictment, as forensic analysis linked microscopic spray paint particles on their remains to a specific type of paint used at the Kenworth factory during the time of their deaths. In early August 2003, local Seattle news outlets reported that Gary Ridgway had been transferred from a maximum security cell at King County Jail to a medium security facility at Airway Heights. Other reports indicated that his legal team, led by attorney Anthony Savage, was negotiating a plea bargain that would allow Ridgway to avoid the death penalty in exchange for confessing to a number of the Green River murders. On November 5, 2003, Ridgway officially pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The plea deal was structured to spare him from execution in return for his full cooperation in helping authorities locate the remains of additional victims and providing detailed information about his crimes. In his statement accompanying the guilty plea, Ridgway admitted that all of his murders took place within King County, Washington. He also confessed to transporting 2 victims remains to the Portland area in an attempt to mislead investigators. During the court proceedings, Deputy Prosecutor Jeffrey Baird emphasized that the plea agreement had uncovered the names of 41 victims who would otherwise not have been included in the case against Ridgway. On December 18, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard A. Jones sentenced Gary Ridgway to 48 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Each life sentence was tied to a separate murder conviction. In addition, Ridgway received 10 years for evidence tampering related to each of the 48 victims, which added another 480 years to his sentence. Later, he was sentenced to a 49th life term after the remains of an additional victim were discovered. In January 2004, Gary Ridgway was placed in solitary confinement at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. On May 14, 2015, he was moved to USP Florence High, a high-security federal prison located east of Canyon City, Colorado. However, in September 2015, following public outcry and discussions with Washington Governor Jay Inslee, Corrections Secretary Bernie Warner announced that Ridgway would be returned to Washington to ensure he remained easily accessible for ongoing murder investigations. He was transported back to the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla by chartered plane on October 24, 2015. In September 2024, Ridgway was briefly relocated from the Washington State Penitentiary to the King County Jail for a few days before being returned to WSP. Authorities have not provided any explanation for this transfer. Ridgway's cooperation with authorities led to the discovery of 3 more victims' remains in 2003. On August 16th, the body of 16-year-old Pammy Annette Avon was found near Enumclaw, Washington, just off State Route 4110, confirming her as one of the Green River Killer's victims. In September of the same year, investigators located the remains of 2 more victims, Marie Malvar and April Buttram. On November 23, 2005, the Associated Press reported that a hiker had stumbled upon the skull of one of Ridgway's victims in a wooded area near Highway 18, southeast of Seattle. The remains belonged to Tracy Winston, who had disappeared from Northgate Mall on September 12, 1983. This discovery resulted in Ridgway receiving his 49th life sentence. In 2023, remains known as Bone 17, which had been found in 1985, were finally identified as Lori Ann Respotnik, a woman who disappeared from Seattle in 1982 and was also one of Ridgway's victims. Ridgway holds the grim distinction of confessing to more confirmed murders than any other serial killer in U.S. history. During months of interviews with law enforcement, he admitted to killing 48 women, 42 of whom were on the police's list of probable Green River Killer victims. On February 9, 2004, county prosecutors released videotaped records of Ridgway's confessions. In one of the tapes, Ridgway initially claimed responsibility for the deaths of 65 women. In a later interview on December 31, 2003, he confessed to killing 71 victims, revealing for the first time that he had engaged in sexual acts with some of his victims before killing them, a detail he kept secret until after his sentencing. Ridgway explained that he primarily targeted sex workers because they were easy to pick up, and admitted that he hated most of them. He also confessed to committing acts of necrophilia, but stated that he began burying his later victims to resist the urge to return and commit such acts again. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to like and subscribe the channel to get more videos like this. Thank you.